session with a panel discussion on impacts of COVID-19 on SDG2. We have with us Mr. Musambia Mutambala, Ms. Dikshya Singh, and the session will be moderated by Ms. Tracy Mamoon. Ms. Tracy is the Digital Communications Officer of Southern Voice. Southern Voice is a network of 51 think tanks from the Global South, all contributing to the global dialogue on their Sustainable Development Goals. Their member organizations are based in 27 countries across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. All are dedicated to leveraging quality local data and research to enhance the debate on the SDGs and increase the 2030 agenda's impact on the South. Before joining Southern Voice, Tracy managed the communications of the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, a public policy think tank based in Jamaica, for 3 years. Her previous experience in communication spans a number of areas, including arts, education, and development. For the past 2 years, she has been working as a part of the Southern Voice Secretariat to amplify the wealth of knowledge on the SDGs emerging from the 50+ think tanks of the network. Her work focuses on creating content to disseminate these think tanks findings to global audiences and bringing these findings into debates around SDGs in the digital space. GCPIT is proud to have Southern Voice as our partner in the Global Sustainable Development Summit 2021. Over to Tracy for moderating the session and introducing the panelists.
Greetings to those of you who are joining us for today's short session. I'll keep the introduction brief since we're only here for half an hour, and begin on behalf of Southern Voice by thanking the Global Council for the Promotion of International Trade for having us at this event. The research which we'll be presenting today is part of a larger Southern Voice initiative that brought different think tanks from across the Global South together to find solutions to different challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. The two researchers that you will be hearing from today will be presenting work done on particular challenges to SDG2, which is zero hunger. They'll be presenting the findings and recommendations from two studies that are going to be published soon that looked at value chain challenges to particular areas that are essential to food security. The first case is in the rice and vegetable value chain in Nepal and Sri Lanka. The second case is in the fisheries sector in Tanzania and Uganda. During the presentation, please make sure that you use the chat function to send us any questions, which the researchers will answer on the conference's website. So without further ado, let's hear from Dikshya Singh. Dikshya is presenting the findings of a study that was led by the South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment in Nepal and the Institute for Policy Studies in Sri Lanka.
Is it visible now, the presentation?
It's visible, yeah.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm just starting my presentation. So I'm here to make this presentation on a study that looks into the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and its containment measures on the food security situation in Nepal and Sri Lanka. The study was conducted between September and December 2020. So only the impact of the first wave of the pandemic that hit both the countries in 2020 have been taken into account. The study was jointly conducted by Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, IPS, and South Asia Watch on Trade, Economics and Environment, SOUTHE for Southern Voice. The research assesses the impact of COVID-19 on rice and vegetable value chains in the two countries. In both Nepal and Sri Lanka, rice and vegetables are the staple in daily food consumption. That is why these items were selected. Based on the findings of the research, this study also attempts to provide recommendations to strengthen food security and social protection measures so that food systems can withstand the disasters in the future. The study is basically a value chain analysis. It uses mixed methods, both quantitative and qualitative approaches. The findings are based on both primary and secondary data sources. Besides undertaking interviews and surveys of 180 stakeholders, which includes the value chain actors, policymakers, and experts in both the countries, we have also used government database on import and production and all that. So, with the detection of few cases of COVID-19, both Nepal and Sri Lanka adopted lockdown as the containment measure. A lockdown as in movement of people were restricted, businesses were shut down, and schools and movie halls and marketplaces were also closed. So Sri Lanka went into lockdown from 16 March to 11 May, while Nepal was in lockdown from 22nd March to 30th June. However, Nepal had case-by-case basis lockdowns later in the next couple of months as well. So the lockdown hit the food security situation by compromising availability, accessibility, and affordability of food. For example, lockdown affected supply of inputs, that affected production, thus availability was affected. While shutdown of markets and disruptions in transportation broke supply chain of food products, impacting accessibility, and halt in economic activities also hit the income of people. At the same time, supply disruptions led to increase in prices. Both of the factors resulted in making food unaffordable to most of the vulnerable people. So, moreover, the pandemic, more than creating new problems, exacerbated the existing issues in the food system and also reduced coping ability of the actors in the value chain. So, value chain actors for both rice and vegetables are similar in Nepal and Sri Lanka. Rice value chain include smallholder farmers, that's like less than 5 hectares of land ownership, and then collectors, processors, importers, cooperative wholesalers, and retailers. Similarly, vegetable value chain also consists of smallholders, then collectors, agents, wholesalers, and retailers. In both the value chains, cooperatives are also active in different roles. They perform multiple roles in the value chain. So, besides that, there's another prevalent factor in the value chains are the persistence of informal network between the actors. For example, farmers often take credit during plantation season from collectors by promising to sell them the harvest at a certain rate. The rates are often less than prevalent support prices. In case of Nepal, such informal network crosses the border to India as well. There are lots of Indian collectors who come to Nepal to buy paddy and all that. So, and as for self-sufficiency in production, Sri Lanka is more or less self-sufficient in terms of selected staple production, but Nepal is more import dependent, especially on India. For example, important rice make up to nearly 50% of the total available stock, and Nepal imports as much as 70% of total domestic production of vegetable. So, border disruptions also impact food security situation in Nepal. So, regarding the major findings of study, let us discuss Sri Lanka related findings first. The lockdown caused farmers to deploy lesser time in the farm. For example, paddy farmers worked 54% fewer days compared to usual times, and vegetable farmers also worked 20% fewer days. Similarly, the farmers report that they used less seeds and fertilizers, basically due to supply disruption. The prices of these inputs also increased due to lockdown and the pandemic. Despite government exempting agriculture sector from lockdown, closure of markets and disrupted transportation created difficulties in procuring inputs, and farmers also found faced difficulties in selling their products. Disruptions also caused spikes in prices, especially of rice, so that government had to intervene and set a maximum wholesale price. In case of Nepal too, government had exempted agriculture from lockdown, but the confusion in the initial days caused some difficulties. Uh, Paddy plantation season began after lockdown was lifted, so there was not much effect on that front. But lockdown created disruptions in procurement of fertilizers, uh, resulting in acute shortage. A lockdown, so not only lockdown in Nepal, but lockdown in India also caused delays in transporting fertilizer consignment, which was already on the way to Nepal. And border closure also, and furthermore, border closure prevented any informal import of chemical fertilizer from India, which is quite prevalent in border towns in Nepal. So despite this, price of rice varieties did not see much fluctuation, but the case of vegetable was quite different. Vegetable farming suffered through shortage of labor and disrupted access to agriculture extension services, which is offered by the government. Uh, Vegetable prices were quite volatile in the review period as they rose between 50 to 100%. However, vegetable farmers and traders report that there was about 60% drop in sales. Thus, we can infer that supply chain disruptions left both consumers and producers at loss. So though domestic producers were not had difficulty finding market for their products, import of vegetables from India increased by 35% during the period. So this also signals that there is a lack of logistical coordination between domestic products and the market in terms of vegetables. So based on these findings, our major recommendations are as follows. In both the countries, producers suffered from shortage of necessary inputs caused by the pandemic, so which also constricted availability of food, and in future also it affects availability of food. So it brings to attention the need of robust system in place to ensure that supply of inputs are also taken care of during such difficult times. Similarly, regarding food insecurity, it is kind of obvious that income shocks that created by the pandemic has necessitated the need to have food-related social security programs for vulnerable people. It could be achieved by strengthening public and private procurement systems. And such public procurement programs not only helps in food delivery to the needy, but ensures that farmers also receive minimum support prices. And this could also prevent any panic selling by farmers. So yeah, to support food security, food processing industry also needs to be supported. That is kind of given. Another important issue that emerges time and again with regard to farming is the need of having a robust agri-financing services to farmers. So easy availability of cheap formal credit could be a key to support farmers and prevent them from falling into predatory informal lending. So, and another issue that pandemic has brought attention to is the need of greater digitalization. So agriculture extension services could also use digital tool for an effective service delivery. So instead, not only use, so they don't even need to use fancy smartphones or things like that, but using ICT tools designed for basic mobile phones and using SMS services could be of great help in this regard. And finally, another issue could be of facilitating e-commerce services, which could help in commercializing agriculture and addressing accessibility and affordability issues in the food system as well. So this is it for now. So we will, the full report will be up, we'll have more information and analysis on this subject, like how food system coped during the first year of the pandemic in these countries. So this is it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dikshya, for these findings and for these recommendations, which cover different aspects, different parts of the value chains, the rice and vegetable value chains, as well as the need for social protection programs to ensure that the most vulnerable are not going hungry, whether in times of crisis or not, among other things. So we're now going to move on to Musambia Mutambala from Tanzania. Musambia will be presenting the findings and recommendations from a study that was led by the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Research Organization in Tanzania, along with the National Agricultural Research Organization in Uganda. So Musambia, you can share your screen now, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I thank you very much for this opportunity. This is really great to share the findings that we have conducted. This was one of the Southern Voice Initiatives project that we have implemented jointly, Stipo here in Tanzania and Naro in Uganda. So I'm presenting the findings as a part of dissemination of this project that was on effect of COVID-19 on the fisheries value chain, the case for Uganda and Tanzania. Yeah, we are focusing on hunger. Hunger is really a huge challenge worldwide because it is estimated that about 2 billion people globally have no regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. And the most affected countries are such as Central African Republic, Zimbabwe, Haiti, North Korea, and Zambia. With the eruption of COVID, we can also see an additional of 83 to 152 million people at the risk of being undernourished in 2020 due to the coming of this pandemic. In East Africa alone, it was estimated that around 150 million people are undernourished, and they are also in grave danger of hunger-related death. Hunger has a very challenging impact. One is premature death, and the other impacts are such as malnutrition. We have also low birth weights, stunts, and also we have obesity in children. So being this situation, we know that as part of United Nations, 193 countries have committed to ending hunger by 2030. We know that in order to fight against hunger, fisheries is one of the sectors that support the livelihoods of 1.5 million people, with a contribution of 1.3% of the total African GDP. So it is really an important sector that fights against hunger. But with the COVID-19, the sector has been disrupted because there was inability to sell fish at a strategic sites that also affected livelihoods and the food security. So the problem of access was so much disrupted. But apart from those studies, we can see that there was a limitation to understand more about the impact of COVID-19 in the fisheries sector. So there was a need to analyze the entire value chain in terms of production, processing, marketing, and consumption. And also, because we have also experienced different policies on tackling the issue of COVID-19, we thought that it was necessary to look at the countries that have adopted the lockdown as compared to the countries that have not adopted the lockdown policy in coping with the COVID-19. And there was a case of Tanzania that has not go for lockdown, and also Uganda that opted for lockdown policy. The aim was to understand the challenges in the value chain and also what are the impacts of mitigating interventions of fishing activities and the communities. And we have now focused on Lake Victoria, which is a source of income for communities in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, living along with shores fishing sector, dominated also by informal micro and small enterprise. So we thought that this was really an important sector to study, not only because it is shared by countries that have adopted different policies in tackling COVID-19 in terms of lockdown and no lockdown, but also the sector itself and the Lake Victoria itself. You can see it has a lot of importance in accommodating informal, micro, and the small enterprises, part of vulnerable people. As part of the findings, we could see that there was reduced fishing hours because of coping with standard operating procedures. Fishers have also reduced the number of fishing, and also there was less fish caught and fewer workers in the factories for processing fish, and also there was element of increased spoilage and the post-harvest losses. When we go for trades, we could see that the borders were closed, and this had an impact on the operational costs that has increased, because if you don't have to sell, you have to keep the fish that you have without gaining any additional benefits. And also there was reduced margins and the profits. And all this, we could see that has threatened the sustainability of business itself. We also studied, we had also an intention to see how the trade was conducted in terms of linking the fishers or the producers of fish to the consumers. And we could see that the overall use of ICT has increased in terms of TV, radio, and the mobile phones. These devices were used to communicate about COVID-19 and also to market the fish to buyers. But there was a challenge of a poor connectivity. In addition, also there was a cost of devices and the data taxes. That was the case of Uganda. That also affected the internet use rate. We could see that all these findings were more felt in countries with lockdown such as Uganda, as compared to Tanzania that did not go for lockdown policy. Therefore, the impact on developing economies should be considered. And we are saying the study has come to the point that mitigating standard operating systems or operating procedures measures should allow sustainability of the fisheries businesses while addressing preventive measures against COVID-19. Because once we sustain the fisheries businesses, we are implying that we are contributing to the efforts towards the Sustainable Development Goal 2, that is intended for ending hunger or zero hunger by 2030. We are also implying that SDG1, which stands for no poverty, will also be contributed, and also Sustainable Development Goal 8, which works for employment, a decent employment, and economic growth, will be also sustained. Therefore, the government should extend infrastructure to allow availability and the use of appropriate fish preservation and the processing technologies, because those who opted to fish but did not have access to sell what they have caught would have infrastructure facilities to preserve their fish without spoilage and getting into loss. As we are also recommending that the government should encourage the use of ICTs in the fishing marketing through reducing taxes on mobile money transfer, ICT gadgets, and social media use. By that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Musambia. And since we are running out of time, I will leave the questions entirely for the conference website as well as for social media. So I'll conclude here by once again thanking both of you for your presentations and for sharing with us these recommendations, which both of them had elements geared towards the different parts of the value chain, but also emphasize the need for the development of infrastructure and capabilities in terms of the use of ICT, as well as the need for strong social protection systems that ensure that whether in times of crisis or not, the most vulnerable are not facing hunger and malnutrition. On behalf of Southern Voice again, I thank the Global Council for the Promotion of International Trade for having us, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you on the conference platform, as well as across our social media accounts, platforms. Thank you.